All right, so this is the door that I've been making to match the trim. Um, so what I want to do in this video is show you how to do this if you want. Now, I didn't actually intend to make doors. When I began this project, I fully intended to buy doors. And after having made a few of them, I can tell you that they're worth every penny to just go ahead and buy them if you can. But I just had really unusually shaped openings, and frankly, I couldn't actually find sensibly priced doors to fit the really shaped and large size of the openings in this 100-year-old house. So in the end, I decided to make my own doors, and I'm going to show you how I did that. So I settled on this sort of more mission style design to go with the rest of the video, and used the original hardware from the old doors. So I'll show you how to put it all together and how to add this old hardware. So yeah, let's get to work on making some mission style doors. So here's the closet door for the room that I've been showing you that's already all glued up. So what I wanted was this mission style door that has these long vertical elements. So when you're making a panel door like this, it's really common for there just to be 3 horizontal pieces, and that the middle one would line up with where the door handle is going to be. But on the sort of mission style, it's different from that. And so you could make this a lot of different ways. I think typically a door would have, 6-inch boards here and as much as 8-inch boards in the middle. So if you're trying to match doors in your house, just take a tape measure to them. Definitely the bottom is usually 8 inches, but since we're custom making these, we know that we won't have to trim any off, right? So that 8 inches on the bottom is usually so you can trim, and it's not going to go here. So for mine, I decided that it's a pretty significant cost savings, and I like the more vertical look to it by only using the 1x3s on the side and the 1x6s in the middle. And then the middle panel here is actually 1/4-inch plywood. But what I found was there's this plywood at Menards that I found where it's actually sort of like this nice maple laminate, and it's MDF in the middle. So it's really inexpensive compared to some kind of higher quality plywoods, but it's really inexpensive, and you get a really pretty nice finish on it because it's maple. So materials you're going to need if you're going to go this route is a bunch of 1x4s, a couple of the 1x6s, and at least a sheet of this plywood that's 1/4-inch. And you want it to be something that's a little nicer than your standard plywood. Okay, so if you do decide to go the route of making your own doors, which I don't necessarily recommend, you're going to need a few extra tools in addition to the ones I showed you in the baseboard video. So of course you're going to need a miter saw to make the cuts. You're going to need, well, I suppose you don't need this, but I use what's called a biscuit joiner. And number 20 biscuits to join the pieces of the door together. You could probably use dowels and a drill press if you have that, but you're going to want some kind of advanced joinery to hold this together, and you'll see it as it goes. I'm going to use 1-inch brads as well as wood glue to hold this all together. So I don't have glue out on the table, but you'll need wood glue. You're going to need a large number of clamps. So these are just really cheap clamps. I think they're like $2 each. I've got 10 of them out here on the table. I think I've got a few more over in the cupboard. You don't want bigger clamps. I think these are 4 feet long to kind of hold it together, as you'll see while it's gluing up. This is a hand planer, but an electric hand planer. You can get away. The first door I made, I actually just went and bought a really old school, cheap, hand planer tool, and that works too. It's a little bit more elbow grease. So if you don't have use for one of these and you want to put in the elbow grease, go ahead and do it the old-fashioned way. And then this random orbital sander is going to be useful for the fact that all of our joints aren't going to be perfect. If you have access to a jointer, you can make the boards extremely flat, and you may not need these as much for the kind of unevenness of the joints. But I'm assuming most DIYers don't have a jointer in their garage. One more tool you're going to need if you're going to do old-fashioned doors. So if you are using newer door hardware, you probably don't need this, and you can just get away with a hand drill. But we're going to have to mortise in those old-school locking mechanisms. And so for that, I've got this kind of portable drill press, and I've built this jig that fits over the door. So the idea is that this can be screwed on to this jig. You can put in one of these sort of X-wing drills, and we can mortise out. Yes, whatever. You get the idea. You can put the drill bit in here and attach your cordless drill to the top of this thing. And then you get this nice thing that's fixed in place that lets us basically mortise out where the hardware is going to go inside the door. Hopefully this will make more sense when I actually get to it. So this is another tool that might be useful if you're going to use this sort of annoying old style of hardware, which you'll see later in the video. Hopefully this makes sense then. So to build the door the way I showed you, you basically need 4 of the 1x4s that you've cut to the height of your door. So for me, that's 7 feet. You need 3 of these 1x6s that you've cut to the width of your door minus 7 inches. And hopefully it'll be clear why in a second. And then you need one little piece of the 1x4 that is basically going to divide your door into thirds. So let me show you how this basically fits together. Right? So the 1x4s are the sides of the door. I know all these have names, but that's fine. So let's say that's the top. Let's say this is the bottom, so we're sort of dry fitting it all together. This is going to run up the middle, and then this is going to frame the thirds. So you can sort of, you can design all this however you want. What I tend to do is I imagine that I'm dividing the door into thirds. So from this spot here to this spot here, right? So it's basically the 7 feet minus 11 inches. Divide that into thirds, and then that's going to be the length that gets you to here, right? So 1/3 down gets you to the middle of this. 2/3 down gets you to the bottom of here. So for me, that turns out to be basically 45 inches. Work out that geometry yourself. Honestly, you can do it however you want. But on these mission style doors, usually these bottom 2 panels are bigger than the top panel. So what we're going to need to do is essentially make 2 of these frames, and then we're just going to glue them to the 1/4 inch plywood. Pretty straightforward. Okay, so what I like to do then is get all this sort of dry fit as straight as you can. We're going to have to do some planing and sanding when this is all together. And then take a pencil, mark across the 2 boards, and we're going to use the biscuit joiner then kind of centered on this pencil mark to make the joint. You go down to the end, do the same thing, get it nice and straight. So for here, these are 23 1/4, so half of that's what, like 11 5/8. Probably want to go ahead and mark that. So everything's nice and centered. Again, this geometry is going to depend on your exact door opening. Okay, so once you've marked, the next thing is just to cut in, if you're using a biscuit joiner, cut in the way you're going to make your joints. So with this biscuit joiner, it's super easy. You've got, it goes up against it, as it's got a bag attached. To collect some of the sawdust, you can set the fence so that it gets the height right. So you want this. There you go. So that it's gonna cut into the thing. And then it's hard to see, but there's a little center spot that you can use to line up with the pencil mark. So, okay, so then all you do is we take the pencil mark that we made. The biscuit joiner has this sort of window that you can line up. with the pencil mark you made. It's got a way to set it, so we're going to use number 20 biscuit, so we set it to 20. Line up the red mark with the pencil mark we made, and then you just sort of plunge it in. So what it does is it makes this kind of groove in here, right in the center, that the biscuit can go into, and it's really quite forgiving. This is why I like the biscuit joiner, right? So it can actually, you really don't have to be that accurate to get a pretty good joint. So what we'll eventually do is cut all of these and join it with the biscuits and some glue. So we want to keep these roughly in the positions where they belong so you don't mix them up. And we can just start laying out biscuits. Again, I'm using number 20. Okay, well, I don't know what happened to the footage of me gluing either one of these doors up, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sort of show you how to use these biscuits, right? So here's just 2 scraps that I have made the joints in. What I like to do is if you're going along this one, I stand it up and I go along, and you can put just a little bit of glue. Really doesn't take much because you don't want it squirting out all over the place. So what I usually do is I stand these long pieces up and I put all of the biscuits in like this all the way along the length on both sides. And then for these middle pieces, I stand them up and I put the biscuits in. And now you've got all the biscuits in that you would need to put in. Then you can go around to these ones that are laying down, because if you put the glue in and just leave this sitting here, it will drip out all over your working surface. So keeping it upright while you're working, just in my experience, a limited experience, keeps it from dripping out all over the place. And then when you're ready, you can go and you can turn down its side. You just join them up like this. It's really easy. What you're going to want to do, wipe off the excess glue. The reason why I had this plastic down is because it's my experience, you are going to glue it to the table, so you might as well glue it to plastic. But what you definitely want to do, I don't know if you can see on the camera how much this can twist. We're going to have to sand this flat later, so you definitely want to go through and make everything as flush as you can. If you have a joiner, obviously you can probably get this piece jointed perfectly, but this is DIY. So twist it, whatever it takes to try to get it as straight as you can. So the biscuits are just like that. So there's a sample joint glued together. And then what I tell you is I take my 3 clamps. You can see I clamp them along the ends. Ideally, I think you probably want to clamp for here too, but I don't want a clamp that's big enough for that. And it seems to work just fine. And so that's how you join up the biscuits. Sorry that footage didn't work, but it's probably the easiest part of this entire video series. It's just sort of putting in the biscuits and clamping it together. So hopefully that makes sense, even though my video failed. Yeah. So the next step is to glue the 1/4-inch plywood on the middle. And the reason we're using 1/4-inch plywood, the first time I experimented with making a door, I just had some scrap, 1/2-inch plywood. And the door that I made, it weighed like 80 kilograms. This door would stop a tank. And I just feel like for interior doors, you don't need them to be bulletproof. So we're going to use 1/4-inch plywood just to keep the weight down. And it's really all we want is a veneer rock here. Right, so the plywood comes in 8 by 4 foot sheets. So if you want only one piece, you're obviously only going to get one door out of this, but you're going to have a fair bit of scrap. So if you're making a lot of doors, it's really worth hanging on to that scrap. So here's a piece that probably came off the top of one of my doors. What you can see is that this is big enough actually to close this panel, right? So again, this door doesn't have to be completely solid. You just need the openings to look good. So definitely hang on to your scrap. You could probably get like 1.5 doors out of the sheet of plywood. So hang on to those scraps, particularly closet doors, like the one I showed you at the beginning of the video. They're much more narrow, at least in my house. So we're going to cut down this sheet because I don't actually have any scrap big enough to cover all of this door. We're going to cut down the sheet and we'll get it all glued together. All right, so it is now, I think like 3 years later. The pandemic kind of got in the way of a bunch of my woodworking projects. We were all kind of locked up inside. But here's the basic idea, right? So the footage I have just showed you how to make this frame. Obviously, you make 2 of them, and then you glue the plywood in between. I mean, there's no trick to the glue. Make sure it's spread nice and evenly, and then that's what these little clamps are for. The idea is then you're just going to go around, clamp this together to hold it down while it's gluing up. I'm not going to film it, but I also like to put a few brads in, just a few pins. This is 1/2 inch, so you've got 2 layers that are 1/2 inch and 1/4 inch in between. So I use 1-inch brads, which is pretty good for making sure all 3 layers get pinned together with the glue and with a little bit of metal pins together. And then you have what looks quite a bit like a door. At this point, you're mainly finished. So the only thing that you have left to do once you get up to this point after it's glued up, and like I said, I go around and make sure I get a good seal with clamps all the way around. The only thing you have left to do is
to mortise in the hinges and the doorknob and locking mechanism.
I apparently can't find any footage of doing that. This is like, I think almost 5 years later, maybe more. But if you notice, go look at some of the doors in your house right now. Most often the hinges are flush mounted on the inside of both the door frame and the door itself. I imagine you could use a router for this, but it's pretty awkward to hold a door up on the router table. So I just used a chisel. This one probably needs to be sharpened. So a nice sharp chisel, trace out the door hinge, and it's pretty easy because they're only a couple millimeters thick to just chisel out an area, and it doesn't have to be super clean in my experience. This is DIY. If you're a professional, you can probably do a much better job. But it doesn't have to be super clean because it's going to be covered up by the hinge anyway. So you can do that on both sides, and then that's how you get the hinge in. While we're on the topic, you'll probably want to do the same thing for the latch catch thing. You could probably just use a fairly large Forstner bit or something to drill in enough for the actual locking mechanism to go inside. And then, yeah, just chisel out a little bit for this to be flush with the door hinge. All right, and while we're at it, you'll probably need to mortise out a little space for this kind of faceplate that tends to go on with the door hardware itself. Again, you can probably just use a chisel for that. That brings us to the actual door hardware itself. Now this door, I don't actually own the house where I installed all those doors, so I can't show you, but this one has a much more modern doorknob. And for those, I'm pretty sure you just drill a hole through for this part to go in, and then a hole through this way, and then you kind of connect it up together. I think these are much easier to install, and I'll put a link down in the description for another tutorial on how to install these. For my doors, I was reusing the 100-year-old hardware, and for that it was this huge kind of box that had to fit down into a pocket inside the door. That was a lot harder to mortise in with DIY tools. I can show you the tool and kind of describe my method for that. In my experience, most people don't get this far in my videos, so if you actually are seeing this, drop a comment down below. All right, and then, yeah, to mortise in that bigger locking mechanism, the sort of 100-year-old one, that's where I use this kind of portable drill press that I showed you at the beginning of the video. Again, they don't own it anymore, but you can rewind back to the beginning. I just made a jig out of 2x4s. This set has holes that you can screw it down. So I made a jig out of 2x4s that allowed me to lock this in place over the door, slide it in and clamp it if you want it. It's cool. I had to modify the drill, so make sure you have one with a chuck that's big enough that you can attach your drill to this and then get a Forstner bit that is appropriate diameter for whatever hardware you're putting in. Put that into the chuck of this thing, and then I basically just drilled along the length. So that gives you a bunch of kind of rough holes that you have got about probably 90%, 95% of the material out at that point. And then the fun begins, and that's when I came back with the chisel and got it to the point where the actual hardware would fit down inside. You have to be really careful here, at least with my doors and my hardware, there wasn't a lot of material left on either side. So work really slowly and be really careful that you don't bust out and waste all your outer work and frankly, a couple $100 worth of wood probably. If anyone knows a better method, I would love to hear it, but that's how I did it. So if you've got this far and you're considering doing this, definitely leave me a comment down below. I'd love to hear what you're thinking. Definitely consider subscribing if you watch this far. Nobody ever watches this far. Yeah, and I'll catch you in the next video.